Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. November 9th, 1967 was a turning point in the life of Lance O. Saijan, a pilot in the United States Air Force, was sent on a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines aboard an F-4 Phantom jet. His mission was to photograph enemy territories and gather intelligence. However, this mission would turn into a much bigger test of his courage and survival skills. During the flight, Saijan and his co-pilot came under heavy enemy fire. The aircraft experienced a massive jolt when one of the engines was hit by enemy air defense systems. One of the engines failed suddenly, and the plane had to descend rapidly. Within seconds, Saijan witnessed a catastrophic loss of control in the cabin of the aircraft. The F-4 Phantom, now falling uncontrollably, crashed into a forested area. Upon impact, the plane exploded, but by a miracle, Saijan survived. Emerging from the wreckage with severe injuries, Saijan was bleeding from various parts of his body. He had major bone fractures and head injuries. His legs were especially damaged, leaving him immobile due to the severity of the impact. However, Saijan's survival instinct kicked in, and he began to move despite the dire condition of his body. Saijan moved a little away from the wreckage to find shelter, knowing that he was in enemy territory. The forest not only increased the danger from his surroundings, but also made it easier for the enemy to detect him. At that moment, he was fighting, not only for his own survival, but also to avoid falling into the hands of enemy forces. The pain from his injuries intensified with each passing minute. His uniform was soaked in blood, and he tried to stay hidden by observing the surroundings to prevent enemy soldiers from finding him. Every movement was painful, and at one point, he realized that one of his legs was severely broken. He had to move slowly and cautiously, as any sudden motion could cause him to bleed out faster, decreasing his chances of survival. To survive, he decided to implement a few strategies. First, he aimed to find a place to hide, but the pain was so overwhelming that for a while he chose to remain where he was. Mentally, he tried to focus on something other than the pain. At the same time, he worked hard to find water and food, but in such an environment, food was nearly impossible to find, and his survival struggle became more challenging with each passing minute. Saijan didn't need to be a survival expert. His survival instincts and strong will were all that mattered. He moved a few hundred meters from the wreckage and attempted to climb to higher ground to avoid the enemy. However, his physical injuries slowed his movements. Still, the desire to survive kept him going. After the plane crash, Saijan had to fight, not only nature's harsh conditions but also the enemy forces around him. These tough conditions strengthened his courage even more. However, with each passing hour and day, the physical and psychological toll pushed him to exhaustion and weakness. Yet his determination to survive gave him inner strength. At that moment, even though there seemed to be no hope of rescue, Saijan only had one thought in his mind: to do whatever it took to survive, avoid capture, and wait for a possible rescue. However, Saijan's story would become more than just a tale of surviving a plane crash. It would serve as an example of how the human survival instinct can emerge even in the most challenging circumstances. While continuing his fight to survive, in the forest, each passing moment made the challenges he faced exponentially harder. Next to the wreckage he had left behind, Saijan was not only battling nature's harsh conditions but was also constantly developing strategies to prevent enemy soldiers from finding him. He had no idea exactly where he was or which enemy forces were in the vicinity. However, he knew he had to account for every detail in order to survive. Saijan realized that his biggest advantage after the crash was his ability to remain undetected. Injured, in pain, and with only a few hours of sleep, he tried to focus on his surroundings to continue his fight for survival. Moving away from the wreckage, he slowly made his way deeper into the forest. But every step was made more difficult by the pain in his broken legs. Moving slowly, advancing quietly, and most importantly, preventing the enemy soldiers from spotting him, he remained extremely cautious. There was no sign of enemy soldiers in the area, but Saijan remained alert. The possibility of the enemy finding him was always present, As he moved through the forest, the pain from his injured legs and broken ribs slowed his steps. Moving slowly seemed to be the only way he could survive in a situation where even the smallest mistake could be fatal. At this point, as his condition worsened, Sijan carefully planned each step as he moved forward. Trying to move quietly through the forest so the enemy wouldn't see him, Sijan had to contend with the constant threat of the noisy forest environment and the encroaching darkness. As night fell, he decided to use the cover of darkness to his advantage. While the night made it harder to detect the dangers around him, it also gave him an opportunity to move more freely. The darkness became a cloak for him, but it could also be an advantage for enemy soldiers. As night fell, Sijan began to move more. Though the darkness gave him some comfort, the challenges grew. His body was quickly weakening as, despite his injuries, he couldn't find food or water. The sounds of the battlefield and the movements of enemy soldiers heightened his fears. When he suddenly heard an enemy soldier nearby, his heart raced. Holding his breath, he remained perfectly still, hoping the enemy wouldn't notice him. For a few seconds, Sijan trembled with the fear and anxiety of survival. In these moments, Sijan's mind was constantly calculating. If he was caught, the enemy could torture him mercilessly, or even kill him. But he was too strong to accept the thought of death. No matter what, he had to escape and survive. Understanding how slow and careful he had to move, he continued to advance quietly, taking slow steps, stopping frequently to check his surroundings, and listening for any movement in the depths of the forest. One day, as he searched for a small shelter to spend the night, Sijan's body could no longer withstand the strain and was racked with pain. The pain from his broken legs intensified, and the infection in his wounds made every movement more difficult. However, this pain and exhaustion did not diminish his determination. He was engaged in a mental battle. Though his body was close to giving up, his inner strength urged him to continue. While Sijan was being cautious and stealthy to avoid facing the enemy, he was also trying to seize every opportunity to survive. As the days passed, the conditions around him became increasingly difficult. Hunger, thirst, and the slow breakdown of his body were severely affecting his morale. But above all, Sijan was determined to preserve his pride and military honor. He would not allow himself to be captured by the enemy. Something in his mind constantly reminded him to keep fighting. Survival wasn't just important for him, it was also crucial for the soldiers he had served with in the war. He believed that his intense struggle to survive each day would eventually bring him a glimmer of hope. The fear of facing the enemy gave him the strength to take another step. Each day was seen as another opportunity to survive. Sijan's fight turned into a heroic tale, not just of surviving a plane crash but also of battling harsh conditions, pain, and the threat of the enemy. Lance Sijan had survived the plane crash and was continuing to survive deep in the forest. But survival was only the beginning. The challenges were growing every day, constantly testing his will and physical strength. His wounds continued to bleed, and infections rapidly spread throughout his body. The pain became a test of patience, pushing Sijan to the brink of exhaustion. In the beginning, his effort to hide in a safe area was crucial for his survival. The forest was filled with both the threats of nature and the enemy. While waiting for danger from both sides, Sijan realized that something had to change for him to survive. His body was rapidly weakening, and above all, he needed to find food and water. However, finding food in the forest was not just a reward to relieve his pain but a vital part of his struggle for survival. Sijan didn't know how to utilize natural resources, but his survival instincts guided him to make the right decisions. Finding a river or stream, searching for water in the wilderness, was the only thing that could replace the time lost with each step. Just a sip of water could extend his days and give him a chance to survive. But most of all, his body was weakening with each passing hour, and the pain was intensifying, putting him in even greater danger. His injured legs continued to slow him down, causing unbearable pain with every step. The suffering he endured brought pessimistic thoughts to his mind, but a glimmer of hope for rescue still existed. In these harsh conditions, the task of finding water and food forced him to keep moving. Many times, exhaustion and pain caused him to fall to the ground, but each time he managed to get back up and continue. Despite the agony in his body, his determination to survive kept him going. Infections were quickly spreading throughout his body. The wounds on his body had become infected, and bacteria spread rapidly, draining his energy. The broken bones in his legs worsened due to the constant need to move. With each step, the dangers of the surrounding forest and the presence of enemy soldiers made his survival even harder. His body was rapidly weakening due to infections, and Saijan was trying to push forward with less and less strength each day. Every inch of his body, the wounds on his head, the broken legs, and the infected open wounds were a constant reminder. His time was running out. The presence of the enemy was another major threat. While listening carefully to the sounds around him, Saijan noticed traces of enemy soldiers in every corner of the forest. The silent footsteps from the depths of the forest set off alarm bells in his mind. The enemy soldiers searching the area kept Saijan under constant threat. He needed to move quickly, but the injuries and infections limited him. In this situation, nothing was helping Saijan except his survival instincts and determination. He had to remain cautious at all times. Knowing that enemy soldiers could be just a few hundred meters away, Saijan carefully planned each step. Moving quietly, he tried to find the right direction. He searched for a place to hide, always prepared to face the enemy threats that could appear at any moment. Any sound, any foreign movement was a potential death threat for him. While struggling to survive, his body's weakening was also taking a psychological toll on Saijan. The high fever and chills from the infections added a heavy mental burden. The hope of finding food was fading, and the only thing left for survival was determination. Saijan relied solely on his inner strength to keep going. Despite the infections and the pain from his wounds, he continued the battle for survival by taking one step at a time. He fell to the ground many times, exhausted to the point of passing out, but each time he got back up. His mind found the strength to push his body forward. His survival instincts were not only meeting basic needs but were also propelling him forward. Saijan was being tested not only physically but also mentally. The pain and challenges grew with each step, but continuing this struggle with determination kept him alive, one step at a time. Despite the harsh natural conditions, the spreading infections, and the threats from the enemy nearby, Saijan fought with inner strength to survive. Pain and exhaustion did not defeat him. Instead, they increased his resilience. In this process, the drive to survive became his greatest motivating force. Lance Saijan had managed to survive for 46 days, battling the harsh conditions of nature and the threat of the enemy. With each passing day, his wounds worsened, infections spread, and he fought hunger and thirst, leaving him in an exhausted state. However, as always, his survival instincts and courage kept him standing. In the face of the challenges of his struggle for survival, Saijan found strength in his determination and managed to survive every moment when death was close. However, eventually, in a completely physically exhausted state, he could not escape the final major threat he encountered. One day, while moving deeper into the forest, Saijan finally caught the attention of the enemy forces. His movements had slowed down and become so difficult that following and capturing him no longer posed a challenge for the enemy. His wounds, broken bones, and infections had weakened him, and every step had turned into a battle. At this point, Saijan had become unable to endure any further, both physically and mentally. Although the struggle to survive still raged in his mind, his body had given up on him. The enemy soldiers, combing the area from the nearby forest villages, soon came across Saijan's trail. Realizing that the enemy was close, Saijan made one last effort to survive, but he was captured shortly after. At this point, he was unable to move. He was bound and taken as a prisoner of war. Despite his slow and weakened movements, he refused to surrender. Though physically drained, his spirit still resisted. By the time Saijan was captured, his condition was dire. His body was infected. The fractures in his bones had not healed properly, and overall he was extremely weak. His eyes were more vacant than before, yet there was still a sense of determination in his gaze. The enemy soldiers, noticing his condition, took him from the depths of the forest and brought him to a prisoner camp. Despite the frailty of his body, his morale remained strong. However, the brutal nature of the war would soon put him in an even more difficult situation. The enemy typically interrogated and tortured captured soldiers. Sijan was about to undergo a great test to preserve his honor as an American soldier. The enemy soldiers began by subjecting him to physical torture to extract information. They touched his wounds and inflicted unbearable pain, but Sijan never surrendered, not for a single moment. Amid the agony and pressure, he continued to resist mentally. His eyes, growing heavier with each passing minute, still reflected a sense of honor and defiance. During the interrogation, the enemy soldiers attempted to force Sijan to reveal American troop strategies, locations, and other military information. However, despite all their threats and tortures, Sijan never uttered a word. In his mind, there was only one thought. To surrender meant the loss of honor. He never gave the enemy the information they wanted, and with each passing hour, his resistance grew stronger. The enemy soldiers continued to push Sijan to his psychological and physical limits, but he had decided to protect one thing: the honor of the American soldier. This determination turned Sijan into a hero, as, unlike other prisoners, even when threatened with death, he proved that American soldiers would never surrender to the enemy. Sijan's courage was so immense that even the enemy was affected by it. The torture continued to take its toll on Sijan's body. While his mind struggled with the pain and slowly grew dim, his physically exhausted body finally began to break down. In his mind, the cost of the resistance against his body was enormous, but despite his weakening body, his spirit still fought to resist until the end. The continuous interrogation and torture tried to break him even more. Yet, over time, Sijan remembered a truth he knew as an American soldier. An American soldier can never surrender under any circumstances. His resistance became a source of inspiration, not just for his own survival, but for the other prisoners as well. His fight symbolized a spirit the enemy desperately tried to break. In the end, Sijan's ability to resist surrender came at a great physical and mental cost. However, his battle to maintain his honor and refuse to give in to the enemy earned him a legendary place in history. Lance Sijan, after 46 days of relentless survival against the harshness of nature and the threat of the enemy, was physically and mentally exhausted. Finally, after being captured by enemy forces, he entered an even more difficult phase. When Sijan was taken to the prisoner camp, his body was nearly completely depleted. His wounds were infected, his legs broken, and his body covered with severe injuries. Yet the strength of his spirit was far greater than the devastation his body had endured. The conditions in the prisoner camps in Vietnam were brutal. Sijan, as an American soldier, initially continued to fight against the enemy while preserving his honor. However, the harsh conditions weakened him physically more and more each day. Life in the prisoner camp was filled with hunger, thirst, and physical torture. Due to malnutrition and lack of hygiene, infections spread quickly, and as a result, Sijan's wounds did not heal, but instead worsened. The lack of treatment for his wounds rapidly deteriorated his health. Although severely weakened and injured, Sijan's spirit and courage remained unbroken. As his body grew weaker with each passing day, his internal struggle to maintain morale made him a hero to the other prisoners. The other American soldiers in the camp saw how Sijan, despite the hardships he endured, never lost hope and constantly maintained his resistance. His struggle instilled in them a desire to survive and gave hope to those who had lost all hope. Sijan knew that each day without treatment was making him weaker. As the infections in his body progressed, he suffered more pain, but somehow, despite death's approach, he continued to maintain his determination to survive. Even in the shadow of death, he resisted without losing his honor or surrendering. Though his body was exhausted, the strength of his spirit never allowed him to yield. As the days passed, his body could no longer endure. Yet until his last moments, he never lost hope. As he neared death, his eyes still reflected a fighting spirit, as if his survival instinct refused to abandon him. His body no longer had the strength to live, but his spirit, holding on to his identity as an American soldier and his honor, was strong enough to reject death. In the prisoner camp, Sijan's resistance and spirit became a source of inspiration for the other prisoners. He was not just a soldier trying to survive. He was a symbol showing all his fellow prisoners how crucial the fight for freedom and honor was. His courage, his refusal to lose morale, and his unwavering perseverance in the face of adversity reminded the other American soldiers of the power of resistance and hope. Sijan not only pushed the limits of his body, he also tested the limits of his will to survive, ensuring that his resistance and courage reached legendary levels. The greatness of Sijan's resistance during his captivity echoed even after his death. His struggle had been a light for other soldiers trying to survive. Finally, in January 1968, Lance Sijan's physical condition reached a fatal point. His resistance against the harsh conditions of war and the tortures was the only thing that kept him alive. As he approached death and prepared to take his final breath, Sijan never surrendered. His resistance brought him honor until the very last moments of his life. The last days of Lance Sijan demonstrated just how strong his spirit and will were. Though his body was completely depleted, his heroic story helped other soldiers in the prisoner camp hold on to life. His courage, resistance, and honor became an inspiration for many soldiers during and after the Vietnam War. Sijan became legendary not just as a soldier, but as a human being because of the battle he fought and the resistance he showed under any circumstance. After his death, Lance Sijan was remembered as a hero by the American public for his courage and determination. He was not only someone who fought to survive, but also a symbol of someone who resisted with honor and kept fighting until his death. His legendary struggle continues to serve as an inspiration to American soldiers and humanity around the world. Lance Sijan's story of heroism not only shaped the history of the Vietnam War, but also became one of the most powerful symbols of the resilience and resistance of the human spirit. In 1968, after enduring harsh captivity, Sijan died, and years later, his name was honored with the Medal of Honor, America's most prestigious military award. However, Sijan's receipt of this award symbolized not only his extraordinary courage and resilience during the war, but also his fight for humanity and honor. Sijan not only fought for survival, but also resisted the pain and hardships of war while defending human dignity. Though his body was worn out, his spirit continued to fight like a warrior. The resistance Lance Sijan showed during his interrogation by enemy forces, his refusal to provide any information despite the torture, and his unwillingness to surrender made him not only a soldier, but also a hero. His courage went beyond survival instincts, demonstrating how powerful the human spirit can be. Sijan's story became not just a part of American military history, but a symbol of the struggle for humanity. Every step he took, demonstrating an incredible will to survive, the resistance he showed during captivity, and his pride in carrying the identity of an American soldier despite the suffering, made him a legendary figure. His struggle represented not just that of a soldier, but the resistance and struggle for survival of all humanity. In the brutal conditions of war, Sijan's fight for survival meant much more. From the moment he was captured, he became a beacon of hope for other prisoners. Many soldiers who were struggling with despair and fear under the harsh conditions of war found strength in Sijan's determination to maintain morale and survive. His resilient stance symbolized not only his physical strength but also his mental and emotional strength. Many prisoners were inspired by his resistance and fought to survive themselves. After Lance Sijan's death, America did not forget him. In 1976, President Gerald Ford awarded him the Medal of Honor posthumously. This award symbolized Sijan's honor even after his death. The Medal of Honor represented not only his physical bravery, but also the strength and resilience of his spirit. His heroic story became a symbol not only of being an American soldier, but also of the resilience, honor, and fighting spirit of humanity. The Medal of Honor was a symbol of the extraordinary courage and sacrifice Sijan demonstrated as a soldier. Receiving this medal was not just a military achievement, but also a victory for the struggle against the hardships of war. When Sijan was honored with this award, it symbolized not only his victory, but the victory of other soldiers in the prisoner camps as well. He represented the spirit, courage, and determination of all of America's soldiers. John's struggle for survival and the Medal of Honor he later received symbolized not just a military victory in the Vietnam War, but also a great victory of the human spirit. The courage he showed not only under the brutal conditions of war but in all areas of life has inspired people worldwide. John's heroism is not just a soldier's story, but a story written as part of human history. Despite the pain and losses brought by war, John's spirit, courage, and resistance continue to serve as an example of hope for anyone struggling to survive. His story is not just that of a war hero, it has become a legend that demonstrates how a person can fight without losing their resilience or honor, even under the toughest conditions. There is no doubt that his name will be remembered throughout history as a symbol of heroism, courage, and resistance. John's life and the honors he received afterward have not just remained a military achievement. They are also proof of how strong the human spirit can be when faced with adversity. His story of survival and resistance stands as a symbol not just of one soldier's struggle, but of the fight humanity has faced throughout history.